Portageville, Missouri, 1998. Police are notified of the murder of a young woman and her daughter.
Sherry was lying face down in the floor of her home. She had been shot in the head several times. Megan was lying face down, propped up on some pillows. She too had been shot in the head.
It was a horrible thing done by a very weak coward.
Police soon learned of linked attacks.
It appeared, based on the time that they were in the scene, that this was not their first crime.
The linking of all these cases was gathering more and more information about this perpetrator and who he might possibly be.
The case soon turns cold, and police had to utilize a groundbreaking forensic tool, genetic genealogy.
They had looked at hundreds of individuals over the years, and all of the leads went nowhere.
I believe without genetic genealogy, we would not have solved this case.
This is the story of brutal attacks throughout the 1990s, the evil killer behind them, and how police found him after 20 years of searching.
We, like so many police officers, day in and day out, do the best you can, do the best what you think to your ability is gonna bring us crime to a successful conclusion, and science caught up with us and was able to give us the tremendous help and solve our case.
March the 28th, 1998, Portageville, Missouri police receive a call from local farmer Tony Shearer.
The call came in at about 7 minutes after 7 p.m. Tony Shearer that called 911. I was at my house, which is, as crow flies, about a mile from the Shearer residence. Received a call from my boss telling me that there had been a double murder reported in Portageville.
In a town the size of Portageville, an incident of this sort was a rarity.
Portageville is a really small little town, just over 3,000 people. It is a country community where neighbors know each other and like each other.
To this day, there's not a high crime rate in Portageville. It's a very small community where everyone knows everyone.
So the call which Tony Shearer made was just as rare.
Tony had called in to say that his wife and his daughter had been murdered. So dispatched that out to the cars, called for an ambulance, and Portageville Police Department is very close to the Shearers' residence, and the Portageville Police Department were first on the scene.
Before entering the home, police got an idea of the scene from Tony Shearer, who'd been out with his son. The story of how he discovered his wife Sherry and daughter Megan.
Tony and Stephen had been out looking at some fishing nets they had in the river. Megan and Sherry were at home. When they left, Sherry and Megan were out in the yard doing some things. They called to say that they were on their way home, and Stephen was checking on his girlfriend, I believe. They got held up with a crash, a truck off in the ditch on the way home. They called again to check in and let her know that they would be delayed. However, no one answered the second time that they called. They got the answering machine. They left a voicemail about ordering supper for the night. And when they arrived home, they arrived to a horrible scene there in their house.
Stephen goes in first. The mother is in plain view, as well as the daughter. And I think at 14 years old, there's just no way that his mind could comprehend what he was seeing.
Yelled out to his father, "Dad, Mom and Megan are dead." And that's when Tony came around that same corner, and then saw his wife and his daughter.
Police now enter the scene for themselves.
Well, I think the scene was staged, and so as soon as you walk in and saw it, it was horrific. And I think that's what the killer intended on.
Sherry had been shot several times in the back of the head, and that she laid in the living room floor close to Megan, who had been laid over a footstool or ottoman, and that she also had a gunshot wound to the head. She was gagged, and her arms had been tied behind her back with an extension cord, and that it was obvious that she had been raped. There wasn't signs of a struggle or a fight in the house. We believe that the suspect used Megan as a tool to convince Sherry to follow his directions. We know he had a gun at the scene, and if he had been holding a gun to Megan's head, that Sherry would have followed his directions.
Police begin scouring the crime scene for clues.
The initial officers secured the scene. The criminal investigators came to the scene and processed it for any kind of trace evidence, ballistic evidence, DNA evidence, although DNA was an emerging technology at that time. This is one of those crime scenes that they spent a lot of time in and were very thorough in processing it.
We were early stages of DNA, so we knew enough to take a lot of stuff. We just didn't know what was going to turn out to be usable evidence. So we took all the normal stuff that anybody would in an investigation, like the bindings, any type of blood swabs, and just different things like that. But we also took some swabs from Megan's body. We swabbed several areas, but her breast is where we were able to develop our DNA profile.
The bodies of the deceased were now taken away from the scene by the coroner.
After the scene is processed by investigators and they collect all the evidence and take photographs and a video, the coroner takes possession of the bodies and transports them to a hospital where an autopsy is performed.
Sergeant Wyndham from the Highway Patrol was one of the officers that attended the autopsy, and he was responsible for collecting any evidence from the bodies or from the autopsy that would have been submitted to the crime lab, such as ballistic evidence and sexual assault evidence and DNA swabs. They did not have any significant defensive wounds. It appeared that the suspect took control of them very quickly. There were a number of hairs and other trace evidence seized from on and around their bodies, particularly Megan's.
She also had a bite mark on her back right buttocks cheek that was also very faint, and it was faint to the point that the doc that did the autopsies didn't say anything about it. And so when I talked to him, I was like, did you not think those were bite marks? And he said, I didn't see anything. So when I sent him pictures from the crime scene that were taken a couple hours after, he was like, absolutely, those are bite marks. And it's a good thing that you swabbed where you did, because that's probably your best chance of getting DNA.
The cause of death was the gunshot wounds to the head on Megan and Sherry Shear.
It's now apparent that the community has lost two popular and much-loved people.
Megan Shear was a delightful, very bright, very happy little girl who really looked forward to living life every day. And that Sherry Shear was a loving and doting mother who liked nothing more than raising her children and loving her family.
Portageville police now launch a full, comprehensive investigation into the brutal attacks on Sherry and Megan. They are trying to understand what sort of perpetrator could do such a horrific thing.
There's no doubt it was a very evil person that committed these crimes. It appeared, based on the time that they were in the scene, that this was not their first crime. it's just horrific to know their last moments, what they may have gone through.
Within a short time of beginning their investigation, detectives learned of another attack, this time in Dyer County, just across the Mississippi River in the neighboring state of Tennessee.
About 3 hours after our homicide, lady and her 3 children were at home in a rural area of Tennessee, just outside Dyersburg.
She had just got home from grocery shopping, and she was carrying groceries into the house as her kids were playing in the yard, and that a white male in a van had pulled up and was asking directions to a Jeremy Taylor's residence. And she said she didn't know a Jeremy Taylor, but her brother knew everybody. She could go inside and call him.
She immediately gets a weird sense, a feeling like that this is not, there's something wrong with this guy. There's something wrong with this situation.
And she says that she was standing on the porch, and if she had went in and called Dyer County Sheriff's Department, that they could have got there in the time that it took him to get out of the van and come back into the house.
But the man wasn't looking for directions.
She said he later gets out of the van and walks back up there to her and says, "I didn't find a map, but I found this." And he pulls a pistol out.
The adult female and our suspect struggled over the gun.
The man's intended victim moved quickly to try to protect herself.
She was able to get back into her trailer. They were still wrestling over the gun. She was trying to lean against the door and close the door. His hands were inside the trailer. She yelled at her 12-year-old daughter to get the gun off the wall. The father's deer rifle was hanging on the wall.
So they come running into the living room to the front door to give her the gun, and he sees this so through the window in the door, and he pulls the gun out of the door and fires a shot just above the door knob, and it strikes her in the arm, and then he leaves.
She had non-life threatening injuries and survived the attack.
I can't imagine being in that situation and having to protect myself and my children.
Police interview the victim about the attack, and she's able to give crucial details to investigators.
She was interviewed and actually provided a composite drawing related to her attack.
She said he was a small man, small framed, 30 to 50 years old, salt and pepper hair, glasses, she thought. May or may not have been wearing a ball cap, 150 pounds.
Police are able to link this incident to the attack on the Shearer family.
We subsequently connected the crime in Dyersburg, Tennessee, or Dyer County, Tennessee, to our homicide through the use of ballistics. It was a few days, but we were able to confirm that the gun used to shoot her was the same gun that killed Megan and Sherry Shearer in Missouri.
Striations on the bullet as it goes through the barrel of the gun, and that is as unique as a fingerprint. And so knowing that Dyersburg, Tennessee, which was about 45 minutes away, it gives you hope. So now we know what the guy looks like. We knew who he'd asked for. We knew what he had said to that lady, what ruse he had used. So we figured that it had just worked with Sherry, so it's probably the same thing that he said to her.
Police now have quite a few clues as to what sort of person they're looking for. They put what they know into the public domain in the hope that it will elicit a response.
We certainly thought this was not his first crime. We used any means available to share the case information with other agencies and even with the public. We used the FBI's VICAP system to share our case information to look for similar cases. And we suspected if we could connect him to other crimes, we would have a better chance of solving ours. We used inlet messages, which are messages that go to other law enforcement agencies describing our crime and asking for input about similar cases. This case aired on a television show, a national television show, a number of times.
We went on America's Most Wanted and went out to their live filming in Washington, D.C., and we had crews of policemen here waiting for the tips to start coming in.
We received thousands of leads of people calling in on the tip line.
I'm not sure I would have made that decision again, because all we had was a composite drawing, a likeness of someone. So out of about 4,000 leads, it got pretty daunting to go through each and every one and trying to figure out which ones we could actually follow up, which ones were worth following up. It was a pretty big task.
Police now have a huge amount of material to go through, some of it largely irrelevant.
It becomes a game of triage. Some of the leads were so obscure, such as, I think I saw the man depicted in the composite in a Walmart in Oklahoma 6 years ago. Well, there's really not anywhere to go with those kind of leads, so there's no follow-up investigation to be done. If there's an individual that's named, those are the leads that you try to follow up on and see if they even had the opportunity to commit that crime. Many of those folks we got leads on were in institutions at the time our crime was committed.
It's the 1990s and DNA forensics is in its infancy. Despite this, the Portageville police do what they can to create a DNA profile of the killer in the hope that it might help them to track him down.
We had sent our swabs off to a private lab to get a DNA profile, and they were only able to give us about 3 loci, and it takes 13 to be able to enter it into the national database. And then they'd called back and said that of the DNA they had left, they would be able to do mitochondrial DNA.
We were able to obtain mitochondrial DNA from the hair that was found on Megan's body. And we were going around and obtaining hair samples from suspects and sending them to the lab to check against this mitochondrial DNA.
But the DNA fails to get a match.
It was very frustrating. It was frustrating because, one, we were trying to bring justice to Megan and Sherry Shear. And two, we knew that the type of person that committed this crime wasn't going to stop, that there would be more victims, and we wanted to stop him.
Despite the best efforts of the Portageville police and other law enforcement colleagues, the investigations go cold. But then in 2006, police are able to take matters further. They bring what they have to Ruth Montgomery, the forensic scientist at the Missouri Highway State Patrol Laboratory.
There had been technological advances in DNA. We had our evidence reworked and Ruth Montgomery developed a full DNA profile that was subsequently entered in CODIS.
CODIS is the Combined DNA Index System. It is a computer database that is administered by the FBI, and it contains STR DNA profiles that have been developed from crime scenes and from people who have been convicted of crimes as well as arrestees. It has a local level, a state level, and a national level of profile entry. The profile that I developed from Megan Shear went into CODIS in March of 2006, and it was searched locally within the state of Missouri and then nationally. There was a hit to a profile developed from a homicide in Greenville, South Carolina.
It took us back 8 years before Sherry and Megan's murders, and the rape and murder of a young woman named Genevieve Zatricki in her apartment in Greenville.
The more cases that we have, the more people that interacted with this guy, the more chances we're going to have to find him making a mistake and figure out who it is.
Now, after a wait of 8 years, the investigators are able to connect 3 cases. The first 2 by ballistics and the new addition by DNA profiling. They knew they were getting closer to tracking down their multiple murder suspect. It's 2006 and Portageville, Missouri police are still on the hunt for a vicious murderer who killed Sherry Shearer and her young daughter during a home invasion in 1998. They now know through DNA profiling that the perpetrator has been involved in another violent murder, this time in April 1990 in Greenville, South Carolina.
They wanted to go to South Carolina and meet with the investigators there and have a group meeting between the 2, Missouri and South Carolina, to discuss the cases, to determine what the commonalities were, and to ensure that the DNA evidence was actually from the perpetrator of the crime.
We were on a plane the next day. It was uplifting and we felt like we had momentum. They had a crew of hard-working officers out there, and we took a crew of about 9 of us out there. So yeah, it was certainly a breath of life that was breathed into the case because we had new information. It was strange information. Their case was polar opposite of our case, and without the DNA, you would have argued that they have nothing to do with one another.
Portageville police soon learnt more about the death of Genevieve Zitricki.
We were surprised that it was connected to a murder that was so far away. We had learned that Genevieve Zitricki had failed to show up for work for a couple of days, and they sent the handyman over to her apartment to try to make contact with her. When he entered into the apartment, he had located Genevieve in the bathtub with the bathtub still running, and she was obviously deceased.
Jenny lived in a very large apartment complex in Greenville, South Carolina. The patio door of her complex faced the swimming pool area of that complex. It appeared to investigators in Greenville, who we worked extensively with, that Jenny was asleep in her bed when the perpetrator broke into her apartment through the sliding glass door.
Attacked her in a blitzkrieg style that while she was still asleep, he just started hitting her in the head with a very hard, long object that created a lot of blood spatter. And then once he had hit her numerous times, causing her death, he pulled her off the bed and had sex with her, and they were able to tell that by the blood pooling on the floor, and then drug her into the bathroom and put her in the tub on her back with her bottom all the way up under the faucet, and the faucet was turned on hot.
So the police department at the time had located in her bedroom where it had been ransacked. There was clothes strewn all throughout the bedroom. All the drawers on the dresser were pulled out.
There was a message written in black marker on the mirror in Jenny's bedroom that said, "Don't F with my family." To this day, we're not certain if there is some significance to that or if that was merely put there to throw off investigators. The perpetrator took some steps to conceal evidence by placing the contents of Jenny's purse in the sink under running water and actually placing Jenny under running water to try to destroy evidence.
He had tied a knot and then another knot where the first knot was sufficient. It was overkill that you could tell he was really making sure that she was dead.
Both the Missouri murders and Genevieve Zetricky's killing were exceptionally violent, but it didn't look like they had been carried out by the same person.
If it wasn't for DNA, we wouldn't be having that talk because the crime scenes are so polar opposite. My thoughts being that he staged our crime scene, so I thought the stuff he wrote on the mirror was a ruse, that it was just a red herring. Based on our crime scene and what the lady told us from Dyersburg, that this guy had really graduated. He'd gone from no social skills where he could talk to these women. He had to start beating her while she was asleep, to talking his way into the house at the Shear house and nearly getting into the house in Dyersburg.
So who was Genevieve, and could police get any further leads because of her murder?
She lived alone and had formerly been married. Her former husband was looked at as a suspect, but he was eliminated as a suspect as well. The DNA profile from the Zetricky case was developed from a vaginal swab. They had looked at hundreds of individuals over the years, and all of the leads went nowhere.
To the disappointment of the investigators, the linkage to the Zetricky investigation comes to nothing. But then, in 2017, the killer's DNA is entered into CODIS again.
We received a call from our crime lab where there was a case from Memphis, Tennessee that had entered DNA into CODIS, and it had matched our suspect DNA. We contacted Memphis and learned that it was a rape of a 14-year-old girl.
In 1997, two adult females and their children had just returned home from a funeral. Our suspect talked his way into their house through a ruse, indicating he was running from the police.
They too talked about they didn't feel real comfortable around this man. They tried to brush him off and shut the door. He had pushed his way into the house, and he had told the women that the police are after him. He's just trying to get away. He's just trying to get a car, and he needed to get away. The ladies had told him that the car out in the drive has the keys in it. Just take the car. And he had brought with him some duct tape and a pistol. He had used a telephone wire that he had found in the house to tie the women up, and he focused on the 14-year-old that he raped there in the living room.
The perpetrator is described as similar to the one at Dyersburg.
They actually found a composite that was, or a sketch that was drawn up back in 1997. And when you set it next to our composites that we had, they were very similar. The only difference was the glasses on their suspect was tinted where ours didn't have any tint. But they had run out of leads early on in that investigation, and they weren't able to locate anybody.
Driven by frustration and the fact that they knew the case was solvable, the Missouri team began to look at different forensic DNA alternatives.
So at this point, we began to discuss other alternatives other than STR DNA analysis that were out there and available, because the man obviously had not had his DNA collected for previous crimes, and he wasn't in the CODIS database. So discussions turned to possibly conducting genetic genealogy testing.
So there was a conference call between investigators from South Carolina, Tennessee, and Missouri. There had been technological advances in DNA, including genetic genealogy. And there's a company that produces composites based on a DNA profile, an image of this perpetrator based on their DNA. It was initially discussed that maybe that would be a good idea in this case. However, The final outcome of that conference call was it would be much better to do genealogy, genetic genealogy, and attempt to identify at least a perpetrator's family, that would be a good, solid lead to closure of these cases.
The samples were brought to Parabon Nanolabs.
Parabon works in conjunction with other laboratories to develop a short nucleotide polymorphism profile, or a SNP profile, that goes into a different database than CODIS and is searched differently. So the scientific bench work would have been done in collaboration with Parabon and another lab.
We're looking at over 800,000 genetic markers across the genome. And that's what allows us to have this power to detect distant relatives. So that DNA sample needs to go to the lab and go through a process called SNP genotyping. You can also use whole genome sequencing, but in this case, we did SNP genotyping at the lab, and that extracted those 850,000 SNPs. Then the bioinformatics team, our scientists at Parabon, create a file from that. And that file needs to be similar to what you would get if you tested at one of the commercial DNA testing companies, like say Ancestry DNA or 23andMe. So that's what we needed to do with this DNA, was ultimately create a file that would be accepted for upload to GEDmatch and compared against the other people participating in that database.
Police have an anxious time as they wait patiently for the outcome from Cece, the genetic genealogist at Parabon.
It was a couple months later when all the investigators were on a conference call, the Missouri investigators, the Memphis investigators, and the Greenville, South Carolina investigators. When they called, they put Cece Moore on the phone, who explained the family tree that she developed. And she walked us through the family tree and showed us how she come up with the suspect.
This guy was at or near the proximity of each of our crime scenes. He was 5'5", 150 pounds, wore glasses. Robert Brashear. Cece Moore was reading her final report, got through about the first 2 pages and said, "Hey, is everybody still with me?" And I'm like, "Lady, you're talking to a bunch of stupid cops. There's nobody still with you." But the amazing work that she had done was just near magical. That all the things that she did and covered every possible angle. That was near teary moment then, because you knew that your journey's near over.
It's 2017. Police have used the revolutionary new DNA forensic technology of genetic genealogy to finally identify the killer they believe is responsible for a series of brutal rapes and murders throughout the 1990s in states from Missouri to Tennessee to South Carolina. They need to track him down.
Robert Brashears was born in Newport News, Virginia. He grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and he entered the U.S. Navy and was discharged within 8 months. And when he was discharged in Memphis, Tennessee. But he had also done part of his Navy time in Florida.
Robert, it appears, has a dark past.
In 1985, Robert Brashears had picked up a young lady and attempted to rape her, and when she fought him, he shot her and attempted to kill her. But she got away from him and got to authorities. In 1986, Robert Brashears was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the attempted homicide in Florida. He did not serve 15 years. He was released from prison in March of 1989.
When he got out of prison, he moved to Greenville, South Carolina, and his address was within a mile of Genevieve Zatricki's apartment. We know throughout 90 to 97, he was in prison in several different states for several different crimes, and that in 97, I believe, he picks his family up from Alabama and takes them to Jonesboro, Arkansas, which is in very close proximity to Portageville.
Police now believe they have their man, but the investigation hits a new wall when they make their next discovery.
Robert Bashir's was found in a hotel room in southeastern Missouri because they had found a car parked in the parking lot that had unregistered license plates. And they went into the hotel or motel to determine who the owner of the car was. And the clerk sent them to a specific room. And when the investigators went to that room, a lady answered the door and said that there was no man there, that he had left. But an investigator observed someone moving underneath the bed. And when they asked him to get out, then there became a standoff with the police.
He thought that when the police came there that they knew all of his terrible past history, when in fact they were there to talk to him about a stolen license plate. He had his wife and a couple daughters with him. The police had a standoff. They were able to talk him into letting the family go. I think at one point they even talked him out of a gun, and he gave up his gun, which turns out he had a second gun, and ended up taking his own life.
The day he killed himself, he thought his world had came crashing down, and that was the end of the line for him.
It just exemplifies what a coward he was and what type of person he was. He wasn't going to be man enough to stand up and answer for what he had done.
Robert was dead, but police still wanted to definitively prove that he was the man who had committed the murders and the rapes.
Right after we learned that it was Robert Brasher and that he had a daughter, we knew that their DNA would be similar, and we wanted to get some facts about his life that we could use in an affidavit for a search warrant or a court order to exhume the body. And we went to Alabama, where we interviewed his daughter, and we obtained a DNA sample from her, and that was sent to the lab. And we knew then that Robert Brasher was our suspect. She had a lot of questions for us because she was, I believe, 7 years old when he committed suicide in the hotel. She was actually there at the hotel when law enforcement arrived in '99. She did believe, from the stories that she had heard from her family about Robert Brasher's behavior and his criminal conduct, that he was capable of doing something similar.
With the DNA from the daughter, police were able to get a warrant to exhume the body.
At that point, we had enough information that was relatively easy to gain those approvals. We collaborated with the Arkansas State Police, who were very helpful in obtaining the proper court orders where he was interred in Arkansas to have him exhumed. So representatives from the South Carolina law enforcement were on scene, as were we. DNA samples from the exhumed body were immediately submitted to both crime labs, and within about a day, we had it confirmed by both crime labs that Robert Eugene Brasher was our murderer.
So how do the investigators describe the man they tracked down as a multiple killer?
How do you describe a psychopath. I'm not sure what to think about him. I think often, how is a human being capable of this kind of violence against another human being? And what kind of mind did that individual have?
The motive for Robert Bashir's was pedophilia. I think he was a pedophile that wanted to have sex with these young girls, and he didn't mind to kill to do it.
He is a serial killer by definition, and he preyed on young girls and women, and we believe there's several other victims between 90 and 99.
After all this time, is there closure for the victims and for the victims' families?
My heart goes out to the young lady in Florida who had to live with the consequences of Robert Bashir's actions. And she must have great strength and stamina in order to live with the history of that crime. I don't know that you ever get over something like being raped at the age of 14. And I am sure that that young lady carries scars and the consequences of Robert Bashir's actions with her today. And it probably still affects how she lives her life every single day and who she is as a woman.
As you can imagine, a bittersweet. We solved it. You got closure for it. You feel kind of cheated because the guy killed himself. He wasn't going to get justice. But maybe that special place in hell was the justice that we got.
After 20 long years on the case, how important was genetic genealogy in solving this case once and for all?
Sergeant Don Wyndham of the Highway Patrol, if he hadn't had obtained that DNA swab from Megan's breast, we wouldn't have been able to get a full strand of DNA to enter into CODIS. And at the time, the technology was not there to run that sample. That sample just sat in evidence for several years until technology caught up with us.
Forensic genetic genealogy was extremely important in this case. Because Mr. Bashir's was dead, it would not have been solved without it.
It solved the case. We'd still be chasing him around.
And I'm very excited for the technology and what genetic genealogy brings to this forensic science field and the potential that it holds in solving crimes where the perpetrators do not have their DNA in the CODIS system.